Hot take. A lot of RAG teams buy a GPU too early, then discover the real bottleneck was not speed, it was bad latency math.
Exactly. CPU versus GPU for embeddings and re-rankers is not a status decision. It is a workload decision. If you get that wrong, you either overspend or ship a system that feels slow.
And people hear GPU and assume automatic win. More throughput, case closed.
Only if throughput is the thing you need. In RAG, you usually care about two numbers at the same time: how many requests per second you can handle, and how fast one user gets an answer.
So, let's make it practical. When is CPU actually good enough?
CPU is often good enough for low to moderate query volume, especially for query time embeddings, occasional indexing jobs, and small re-ranking stages. If your app handles a few requests per second and your latency target is, say, under 1 second end-to-end, a CPU can be perfectly reasonable.
Give me a concrete case, because this is where teams panic buy hardware.
Picture an internal docs assistant for 50 employees. A handful of searches per minute, maybe a burst after a meeting. You embed the user query, retrieve candidates, re-rank the top 20, then send a few chunks to the generator. A CPU box may meet the latency target just fine, and it is simpler to run.
So the loser in that scenario is the team that optimized for peak throughput they never had.
Right. They pay for idle capacity, add operational complexity, and still might not fix the slow part if retrieval or generation dominates the timeline.
But there is a flip side. When does the GPU stop being optional and start changing the game?
When you have sustained volume or heavy batching, GPUs shine when you can feed them a lot of work together. That changes the cost per embedding or re-rank score, and it can dramatically raise throughput.
Meaning one lonely request does not always show the GPU at its best.
Exactly. A single short query may not create enough parallel work to justify the overhead, but a stream of requests or a large indexing pipeline can keep the GPU busy and make the economics look very different.
Let's do another scenario, because this is where the strategy shifts.
Imagine a customer support RAG system embedded in a live product. Hundreds of users ask questions across time zones. You are continuously embedding queries, re-ranking larger candidate sets, and maybe re-indexing fresh content every hour. In that world, GPU throughput can turn a backlog into a real-time system.
So the power shift is this. CPU keeps you alive at small scale, but GPU can unlock a whole different service level.
Yes, and that service level matters. If your queue grows during peak traffic, your latency target stops being theoretical. Users feel it immediately, and trust drops fast.
Let's hit the part people underthink, batch size. Why does batch size matter so much here?
Because batch size is the bridge between hardware capability and product behavior. Bigger batches usually improve throughput, especially on GPUs, because you process more items in parallel. But bigger batches also mean some requests wait around longer before the batch fills or runs.
So, chasing throughput can quietly hurt tail latency.
Exactly. If your product promises fast, interactive responses, you cannot optimize only for tokens or vectors per second. You need to decide what the user is allowed to wait. That sets the acceptable batch size, and that often determines whether CPU or GPU is the better fit.
Give me the real-world version of that trade-off.
Take two systems. First, a nightly pipeline that embeds 1 million documents after business hours. Latency per document does not matter much. Batch aggressively and let throughput win. Second, a legal research assistant where a lawyer expects results in under 700 milliseconds. There, waiting to build a large batch may be worse than using less efficient hardware.
That is the trap, right? Teams benchmark in bulk, then deploy an interactive app.
Yes, and they confuse lab wins with user wins. The right question is not, which processor is faster in general? It is, which setup meets my latency target at my expected traffic with enough margin for spikes?
And re-rankers make this sharper because they can get expensive fast.
They do. A re-ranker often gives better relevance, but every extra candidate you score adds work. On CPU, re-ranking 10 or 20 passages may be fine. Re-ranking 100 for lots of concurrent users can become the dominant cost. That is where GPU throughput can fundamentally change the architecture.
So, one practical rule is if you keep shrinking candidate counts just to stay responsive, hardware is starting to dictate quality.
That is a good rule. If CPU limits force you to cut retrieval depth or skip re-ranking when traffic rises, relevance suffers right when demand is highest. GPU capacity can let you keep quality stable under load.
But if your traffic is modest and your latency budget is forgiving, CPU may actually be the smarter move.
Absolutely. Lower complexity, easier deployment, often lower cost at small scale. The mistake is treating CPU as amateur and GPU as professional. Mature teams pick based on batch shape, concurrency, and latency promises.
So, the decision is not about prestige. It is about whether you are optimizing for a single user now or a crowd of users all at once.
Exactly. CPU is good enough when demand is light and responsiveness is still on target. GPU changes the trade-off when throughput, concurrency, or larger re-ranking workloads start threatening quality or wait time. In RAG, the winner is not the team with the biggest accelerator. It is the team whose latency budget matches its architecture.